Okay, so the whole point of that is showing how we arrive at concept formation in terms of Rand's epistemology, her objectivist epistemology. And I think that should be very clear now, not only how we do it, but the effectiveness that it has. It's a very effective mode of coming to know, coming to understand. So for Rand, we have two fields of cognition. Right? We have two fields of cognition. The first field is conceptual. So the first is cognitive or cognition, right? Sorry, conceptual. It means the same thing, but I don't want to jump the gun. The first field of cognitive development is conceptual, right? So if we're talking about fields of cognition, the first is conceptual, right? And we know what conceptual is. I just described that, right? Conceptual, and actually let me go a little slow because you might not see it. All right, conceptual is the idea of concept formation, is the result of sensory and perceptual recognition of entities in the world. I then group those entities into units, and then I give a standard with which I describe those units in a very technical sense. Then instead of referring to those standards in a very technical sense, I just refer to the name that I've given it. Triangle rather than blah. Muggle rather than blah. Now I can talk about the concept, right? I can talk about the concept triangle, the concept muggle, and I immediately communicate the concept. There is nothing more powerful than that, because by just me saying the word circle, I've branded an image in your head. And if I tell you to draw a circle and you choose to do it, then I've used my power, in a sense, to create behavior in the world, right? So, this has all types of implications, into sort of behavior modification and so on and so forth. I'm not going to get into it now at all, but I want you to see what she's attempting to do. So the first level of cognition is conceptual. The second, and she spends quite a bit of time on this, is mathematical. Alright, the second is mathematical. She says that concept formation, the idea of concept formation, is largely mathematical. And when I first read this, years ago, I was like, I wonder what she means by concept formation is largely mathematical, largely logical. Like, how is concept formation largely mathematical, largely logical? And then she went on to describe it, and her description was, the thing about Rand is she's very, very succinct. So you have to, you spend a lot of time just reading, one sentence. Mathematical. Mathematical, this idea of the relationship between mathematics or mathematical conceptualization and the role that it plays with cognition is important to describe. Mathematical is contingent on measurement. Right? The mathematical is contingent on measurement, according to Rand. We have to recognize in this idea, in this discussion of measurement, we have to recognize the relationship of the unit, right? We have to recognize the relationship that the unit plays. And what I've written is that has been standardized among units of a similar kind. What in the world does that mean? Okay, mathematical. I recognize that I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 objects, and I think somewhere in the text she talks about a kid counting the fingers on their hand. I say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Right? I have this idea of 10. I have this idea of 1. Parmenides, and maybe in another video I'll talk about oneness, right? Because it's ridiculously deep. But, you know, 1, 2, 3, I come to these ideas of oneness, of 0, of 10, of 9. I come to a recognition of integers. I come to a conceptualization of the infinite by beginning with what I have, my physical body, right, my embodiment, right, so that my access to higher order thought, my access to abstraction begins with my embodiment. And I think Rand would say that that's correct, right? At least that's my interpretation of Rand, right? It's not solely the case that, you know, my body's that important, but there is no way for me to access the truths, and these truths are rigorously defined truths, right? These are natural laws, right? Right? These are laws that are used with certainty, right? With reliability, with predictability, right? There's a number of things that are used, right? These laws are accessible. This is what the hard scientist does, right? The hard scientist tries to find and make sense of the laws that govern our world, right? Physicists might try and find the laws that govern our universe, right? The higher up you get, the further you get away from the Earth is the more abstract it gets, right? The more Einsteinian it gets. The closer you get to the Earth, the more here it is, the more Newtonian in a sense it gets, right? It's more about, you know, launching a satellite or swimming to, you know, a distant point. So that we have sort of this shift. People talk about a shift, but I think there is a role, and I'm not going to get into sort of my interpretation of Einstein-Newton, but that's what the hard scientist does. What I do, what Rand does, what philosophers do, and people always ask, why should I get a degree in philosophy? Why not get a degree in philosophy? Of all the things you could get a degree in, it should be philosophy, right? What the philosopher does is we look at what the scientists say, right? We look at what the geologists say. We look at what the mathematicians say. And we want to assess the coherence of what they're saying. Is what you're saying actually the case? How can I come to know the validity of what you're saying, right? What measurements are you using? And how is what you're saying being justified? And we look for coherence among all of that. So what Rand is doing, and I think she does it exceptionally well, is she's not beginning with the laws of physics, the laws of mathematics, the laws of logic. What she's doing is she's talking to you, just like I'm talking to you, and says, it begins with you. It begins with me, right? The laws of physics, the truths of reality, the truths of nature begin with me, because I come to know the external world by measuring it against myself in my infancy stage. And I don't mean as a child, I mean infancy as far as cognitive development. You know, people who get stuck in that level, all they can think of is the here and now. When you get to a level of knowledge, a level of education, at the level that Rand is on, we can easily talk about the infinite without having to posit this existing thing, the infinite. We recognize that there is this thing, the infinite, but that thing, the infinite, is a mathematical concept. And in a second, I'm going to talk a little bit more about what that is. I don't want to jump ahead. Okay, so we recognize that as far as cognition is concerned, conceptual, mathematical. Mathematical is contingent on measurement. Measurement accesses the truths, the universal truths, if you will, the laws of nature, right? As defined in the hard sciences. And what she says is that our access to that information begins with the embodiment of the human subject. Requirements for a standard of measurements. There is, and this is very important. She uses the phrase, and this is a quote, easily perceivable by man. That's a direct quote, right? The requirements for measurement are easily perceivable by man. It's my foot. It's the fact that I can count on my hands, easily perceivable. I have access to the standard of measurement, right? I can get to understand the natural laws, because the natural laws, it's amazing, right? I could do this forever. The natural laws are, in a very weird sense, and I'm not sure that Rand would necessarily agree with me, but this is my interpretation of it. The natural laws pertain to me, right? the only reason that they have significance is because I exist, right? The natural laws wouldn't have any meaning. They would still exist. The laws would still be there governing the universe. But they would be completely meaningless if it were just rocks and carbon. The fact that I exist, the fact that you exist, the fact that we exist, gives meaning to the natural laws, right? The hard scientists discover the laws. The philosopher attributes meaning to those laws. Why is that law meaningful, right? Why does that law affect, with an A, why does that law affect our lives, right? That's when philosophy is done well, when philosophy is done properly. Philosophy functions on that level, and she does it the best.